I thought I'd seen everything a mother-in-law could do, until mine handed out iPhone 16 Pro Max gifts to all her grandchildren, except my daughter Emma. Her reason? Because she's not really part of the family. But what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment for 2 long years, and her 24-hour eviction notice was just the beginning of what I had planned. Christmas morning started like any other year at my house in suburban Denver. The living room buzzed with excitement as 6 grandchildren, ages 8 to 15, gathered around our massive Christmas tree. Mrs. Anderson, my 68-year-old mother-in-law, had been living with us rent-free for 3 years after losing her house to foreclosure. She claimed it was temporary, but temporary had stretched into 1,095 days of free meals, free utilities, and 0 gratitude. I watched from the kitchen doorway as she distributed identical apple boxes to 5 of the kids. Michael Jr., Sarah, Tommy, Lisa, and Jake all tore into their packages with squeals of delight. Brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max devices, wanting $200 each. My 12-year-old daughter, Emma, sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, staring at the empty space where her gift should have been. "Grandma Anderson," Emma said softly, "did you forget mine?" Mrs. Anderson turned toward my daughter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetie, I didn't forget. You see, these gifts are for my real grandchildren. You're not actually part of our family." The room went dead silent. "Your mother just married into it, and when she divorces my son, which she will, you'll disappear too. I don't invest in temporary people." I gripped the door frame so hard my knuckles went white. Emma's face crumpled, but she held back her tears like the brave little girl she'd always been. The other children shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less excited about their expensive gifts. But that's when I knew the game had changed completely. I walked into the living room with the calmest voice I could muster. "Mrs. Anderson, I need to speak with you privately." She followed me to the kitchen, probably expecting me to beg her to reconsider. Instead, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave my house." She actually laughed. "Patricia, you're being dramatic. It's Christmas." "I'm being clear," I replied. 24 hours. I'll help you find a place if you need assistance, but you will not spend another night under my roof after treating my daughter like that." Mrs. Anderson's smile faded as she realized I wasn't backing down. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for 2 years, preparing for exactly this moment. You see, I'm a paralegal at Henderson & Associates, and I know tenant laws inside and out. Since Mrs. Anderson never paid rent and had no lease agreement, she was legally considered a guest, not a tenant. In Colorado, I could ask her to leave with reasonable notice, and 24 hours was more than generous given the circumstances. But more importantly, I'd been keeping detailed records. Every snide comment about Emma's mixed heritage, my ex-husband Michael was white, and I'm Latina. Every joke about Emma not being really family. Every time she'd take the other grandchildren for ice cream and conveniently forget to invite Emma. I had texts, voicemails, even a few recordings from my phone when she didn't know I was listening. 2 hours into the countdown, Mrs. Anderson started making phone calls. I could hear her in her room spinning the story to anyone who would listen. "Patricia's lost her mind," she kept saying. "She's throwing an old woman out on Christmas over nothing." By hour 4, my doorbell started ringing. First came Michael's sister, Jennifer, then his brother Robert with his wife. They all wanted to mediate the situation, convinced I was overreacting. But here's what they didn't know. I'd already talked to several of them privately over the past months. Jennifer had confided that Mrs. Anderson had made similar comments about her adopted son. Robert's wife had mentioned feeling excluded from family events. "Patricia," Jennifer said, settling onto my couch, "maybe you could give her another chance. She's just set in her ways." "Jennifer," I replied, "remember what you told me about how she treats Marcus? How she always forgets he's allergic to peanuts when she brings snacks to family gatherings?" Jennifer's face went pale. She'd never connected those dots before, but seeing the pattern spelled out made everything click. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She does it on purpose." That's when I knew my documentation was working. People were starting to see what I'd been carefully recording for months. Mrs. Anderson wasn't just old-fashioned or set in her ways. She was systematically cruel to the children she didn't consider worthy of her love. Hour 8 brought the bargaining phase. Mrs. Anderson emerged from her room with one of the leftover iPhone boxes. "I changed my mind," she announced. "Emma can have this one. I bought an extra." I looked at my daughter, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Emma, do you want that phone?" Emma looked up, considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, Mom. If she didn't think I deserved it this morning, I don't want it now." I've never been prouder of my daughter than in that moment. She understood something that many adults never learn, that respect can't be bought with last-minute guilt gifts. Mrs. Anderson's face twisted with rage at being rejected, but there was nothing she could say. A 12-year-old had just demonstrated more dignity than she'd shown in 3 years. By hour 16, Mrs. Anderson was frantically packing while making increasingly desperate phone calls. She'd tried guilt, manipulation, and bribery. Now she was down to her final strategy, playing the victim. "She's throwing me out on Christmas," she sobbed into the phone to whoever would listen. "I have nowhere to go. I might die on the streets." But I'd anticipated this, too. I'd already researched 3 assisted living facilities within her Social Security budget range and printed out their contact information. I'd also calculated exactly how much money she'd save by not having to pay for groceries, utilities, or household supplies. Expenses I'd been covering for 3 years while she hoarded her Social Security checks. The final hour arrived with a knock on my door. Mrs. Anderson had called the police, claiming I was illegally evicting her. Officer Martinez listened to both sides of the story, then asked to see any documentation I had. I handed him a folder containing Mrs. Anderson's bank statements, which she'd left on my kitchen counter, proving she had over $15,000 in savings. I showed him records of all the household expenses I'd been paying. Most importantly, I showed him my documentation of the pattern of discrimination against Emma. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said to Mrs. Anderson, "you have no legal right to remain in this house. Ms. Rivera has been more than generous with her notice period. I suggest you accept her help in finding alternative housing." As Mrs. Anderson loaded her belongings into Robert's truck, she turned back one final time. "You'll regret this, Patricia. Family is everything, and you just destroyed ours." "No," I replied calmly. "You destroyed it the moment you decided my daughter wasn't worth loving. I'm just refusing to enable it anymore." That what happened next would prove that standing up to a bully doesn't just change your life. It gives others permission to change theirs, too. 3 days after Mrs. Anderson left, my phone rang. It was Jennifer, and her voice was shaking. "Patricia, I need to tell you something. After seeing how you handled Mom Anderson, I started thinking about Marcus. All those times she forgot about his allergy. All the comments about him not looking like family. I confronted her yesterday." Jennifer went on to explain that she'd driven to Mrs. Anderson's new assisted living apartment to have it out with her. But instead of finding a remorseful grandmother, she discovered something much more disturbing. Mrs. Anderson had been systematically playing favorites among all the grandchildren for years, and Jennifer wasn't the only parent who'd been suffering in silence. She had photo albums, Patricia. 7 albums labeled "My Real Grandchildren," with pictures of only 3 kids, the ones who look most like Michael. Marcus wasn't in a single photo, and neither was Emma. There were even pictures from family events where she'd literally cut Marcus and Emma out of group photos. That phone call led to another, then another. Within a week, I was part of a group text with 4 other parents who'd all experienced Mrs. Anderson's favoritism, but had never spoken up before. Robert's wife, Sarah, confided that Mrs. Anderson had told her youngest that he was the practice child and wouldn't amount to much. Michael's cousin Dave revealed that his daughter had stopped wanting to attend family gatherings because Grandma Anderson makes me feel stupid. We decided to meet for coffee, and what emerged from that conversation was heartbreaking. Mrs. Anderson had spent years dividing families, creating hierarchies among innocent children, and manipulating parents into competing for her approval. The iPhone incident wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a decades-long pattern of emotional abuse. "I can't believe we all just accepted it," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting the kids by not making waves, but I was actually enabling her to hurt them." That's when we made a collective decision. All 5 families would implement boundaries simultaneously. No more free housing, no more unrestricted access to grandchildren, no more tolerating discriminatory comments or behaviors. Mrs. Anderson would have to earn her place in our children's lives through consistent, respectful behavior. The intervention was swift and surgical. Within 48 hours, Mrs. Anderson had lost her primary housing option with Robert, her backup plan with Jennifer, and her weekend refuge with Dave's family. For the first time in her adult life, she was facing real consequences for her choices. But Mrs. Anderson had one final card to play, and she played it with the desperation of someone who'd lost control of everything. 2 weeks after our intervention, she called 911 claiming chest pains. The ambulance rushed her to Denver General, where she was diagnosed with anxiety and given a clean bill of health. But she used the opportunity to summon the entire family to her bedside. "I'm dying," she announced dramatically when we all gathered in her hospital room. "The stress of being abandoned by my family is killing me. Patricia, you're literally murdering me with your selfishness." I watched my ex-husband Michael pace the room, clearly torn between guilt and skepticism. The other family members shifted uncomfortably, some beginning to waver in their resolve. Mrs. Anderson had always been skilled at emotional manipulation, and the hospital setting gave her performance added legitimacy. But I'd learned something important in my years as a paralegal. When someone's story doesn't add up, investigate. So while Mrs. Anderson held court from her hospital bed, I excused myself to speak with her attending physician. "Dr. Chen," I said quietly, "I'm Mrs. Anderson's daughter-in-law. Can you tell me about her prognosis?" Dr. Chen consulted his chart. "She's in excellent health for her age. Blood pressure is perfect. Heart function is normal. No signs of cardiac distress whatsoever. The chest pains were caused by anxiety, which resolved completely once she felt she had everyone's attention." Armed with medical facts, I returned to the hospital room where Mrs. Anderson was still performing her death scene. "Mrs. Anderson," I said clearly, "Dr. Chen says you're in perfect health. Would you like to explain to everyone why you told us you were dying?" The room went silent. Mrs. Anderson's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Michael stopped pacing and stared at his mother with dawning realization. Jennifer's mouth fell open. Robert actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You lied," Michael said slowly. "You actually lied about having a heart attack to manipulate us." That was the moment Mrs. Anderson's power finally irrevocably broke. Even her most loyal defenders couldn't rationalize away a deliberate deception about a medical emergency. The last threads of family loyalty snapped as everyone realized they'd been played by a master manipulator for years. The drive home was quiet. Emma sat in the passenger seat processing everything she'd witnessed over the past month. Finally, she spoke. "Mom, was I really the problem? Did I do something wrong?" I pulled over and turned to face my daughter, this incredible, brave, beautiful girl who'd been made to feel less than worthy by someone who should have protected her. "Emma, you were never the problem. You were just the excuse someone used to be cruel. The problem was always in her heart, not in who you are." As we drove home to our peaceful house, our Mrs. Anderson-free house, I realized something profound had happened. We hadn't just evicted a toxic family member, we'd evicted toxic patterns, toxic expectations, and toxic definitions of what family should be. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, "No more." And sometimes, standing up to one bully gives an entire family permission to heal. The transformation of our house began the very next week. Emma stood in the doorway of what had been Mrs. Anderson's room for 3 years, her eyes wide with possibility. "Mom, can we really turn this into my art studio?" I looked around the space that had harbored so much negativity and nodded. "It's your room now, baby. We can make it whatever you want." We spent the weekend painting the walls a soft lavender, Emma's favorite color, and installing proper lighting for her artwork. Where Mrs. Anderson's judgmental presence had once filled the space, we hung Emma's paintings and sketches. The room that had been a source of daily tension became a sanctuary of creativity and joy. "Look, Mom," Emma said, showing me a watercolor she'd just finished. It was our house, but in her painting it was surrounded by vibrant flowers and butterflies. "This is how home feels now." That painting brought tears to my eyes because it captured something I'd been struggling to articulate. Our house wasn't just quieter without Mrs. Anderson, it was lighter, freer, full of possibility again. Emma had started humming while she did homework, something she hadn't done in years. But the most significant change was financial. The morning I sat down to review our budget without Mrs. Anderson's expenses, I couldn't believe the numbers. $800 per month. That's what I'd been spending on her groceries, medications, transportation, and incidental expenses while she hoarded her Social Security checks. For the first time since my divorce, I was able to put money into Emma's college fund. I enrolled her in weekend art classes at the Denver Art Museum, something I'd always wanted to do but couldn't afford. I even started an emergency fund because the anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck while supporting an additional adult had been crushing me for years. "Mrs. Rivera?" Emma's art instructor, Ms. Williams, pulled me aside after her 3rd class. "I wanted you to know that Emma has exceptional talent. She's also mentioned that she's been much happier lately. Whatever changes you've made at home, they're clearly working." I watched Emma across the studio, completely absorbed in a charcoal drawing, her face serene and focused. "We removed some negativity from our environment," I told Ms. Williams. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The ripple effects extended beyond our household. Jennifer had started bringing Marcus to family gatherings again, and for the first time, he wasn't anxious about being singled out or excluded. Sarah's youngest son had stopped asking if he was the dumb one in the family. Dave's daughter was excited about Christmas for the first time in 3 years. Our neighborhood rallied around us, too. Mrs. Chen from next door, who'd witnessed years of Mrs. Anderson's loud criticisms of my parenting, brought over homemade cookies. "I should have said something sooner," she confided. "That woman was always yelling at Emma for normal kid behavior. You did the right thing." Even Emma's teachers noticed the change. Her grades, which had been solid but unremarkable, suddenly shot up to honor roll level. Her confidence in class discussions improved dramatically. It was as if removing Mrs. Anderson's constant criticism had unlocked Emma's natural academic ability. One evening in February, as Emma and I worked on homework together at the kitchen table, she looked up from her math worksheet with a serious expression. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always, baby. What's on your mind?" "Why did you wait so long to make Grandma Anderson leave? I mean, I'm glad she's gone, but she was mean to me for years." I set down my pen and really looked at my daughter. At 12, she was wise enough to ask the hard questions, and she deserved an honest answer. "Emma, I thought I was protecting you by keeping the peace. I thought if I just worked harder to make her happy, she'd eventually warm up to you. But I was wrong. I was so afraid of conflict that I let someone hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think there was something wrong with me. Like, why didn't she love me the way she loved the other kids?" "There was never anything wrong with you," I said firmly. "The problem was in her heart, not in who you are. And here's what I learned. Family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. Family is about people who choose to love and protect each other." "Like you and me," Emma said with a smile. "Like you and me, and Ms. Williams and Mrs. Chen, and all the people who see how amazing you are and celebrate it." This conversation became a turning point in how we talked about relationships and boundaries. Emma started asking questions about friendship dynamics at school, about when it's okay to walk away from people who don't treat you well. I realized I was teaching her lessons I'd never learned myself, that love doesn't require accepting mistreatment, that she has the right to expect respect in all her relationships. But while we were healing and rebuilding, Mrs. Anderson was facing the reality of her choices. Robert called me in March with an update that was both satisfying and sobering. "She's at Sunset Manor Assisted Living," he told me. "She's paying $2,800 a month out of her own savings because Medicare doesn't cover it, and she's furious about the expense. She keeps calling everyone, trying to guilt us into taking her back." "How's she adjusting?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Poorly. She expected special treatment from the staff, but they're professionals who don't tolerate her manipulation tactics. She's complained to the management about everything, her roommate, the food, the activities. They've actually had to have discussions with her about treating other residents respectfully." Robert paused, then continued. "The weird thing is, she seems genuinely confused about why we all pulled away. She keeps saying things like, 'I don't understand why everyone is so sensitive now.' It's like she can't grasp that her behavior had consequences." This wasn't surprising to me. In my paralegal work, I'd seen plenty of people who were so accustomed to getting their way through manipulation that they genuinely couldn't understand why their tactics stopped working. Mrs. Anderson had spent decades perfecting her emotional control strategies, and suddenly finding herself powerless was probably genuinely bewildering. "Has she had any real reflection about her behavior?" I asked. "Not really. She's mostly angry and convinced she's the victim, although—" Robert hesitated. The social worker at Sunset Manor did mention that Mrs. Anderson asked about family therapy. Not to change her own behavior, mind you, but to fix all of us so we'd start respecting our elders again. I actually laughed at that. Even in defeat, Mrs. Anderson was trying to control the narrative and avoid personal responsibility. The isolation she'd created for herself became more apparent as months passed. Easter came and went without any invitations to family celebrations. Her birthday in June passed quietly. The woman who had once held court at every family gathering was spending holidays alone because she'd burned every bridge through her need to control and criticize. But I didn't gloat. If anything, I felt sad for her. She'd had 6 grandchildren who could have genuinely loved her if she'd been capable of loving them back unconditionally. Instead, she'd created a hierarchy that ultimately left her completely alone. As summer approached, Emma and I started planning a different kind of celebration. My daughter would be 13 in August, and for the first time in years, we could plan her birthday party without worrying about Mrs. Anderson's comments or manipulations. "Can we have it in the backyard?" Emma asked excitedly. "And invite my art class friends? And can we do a painting party theme?" "We can do whatever makes you happy," I told her. "It's your day." Planning that party felt revolutionary. We picked decorations Emma loved without worrying about criticism. We planned activities that would make a 13-year-old happy without considering what a disapproving adult might think. We invited people who genuinely cared about Emma, not out of obligation, but out of authentic affection. The party itself was magical. 12 kids painting canvases in our backyard, laughing and creating together. Ms. Williams came and helped set up an outdoor easel station. Mrs. Chen brought her famous chocolate cake. Jennifer came with Marcus, and for the first time at a family event, he looked completely relaxed and included. As I watched Emma glowing with happiness, surrounded by people who celebrated her exactly as she was, I realized we'd accomplished something profound. We hadn't just removed a toxic person from our lives, we'd created space for genuine joy and authentic relationships to flourish. The final piece of our healing journey came that Christmas, exactly 1 year after the iPhone incident. Emma had earned straight A's for the entire semester, so I surprised her with an iPhone 16 Pro Max, the same model Mrs. Anderson had given to the other grandchildren. But this phone meant something entirely different. It wasn't a symbol of favoritism or conditional love. It was recognition of Emma's hard work, her character, and her worth as an individual. "Mom," Emma said, holding the phone with reverence, "this feels different than if she had given it to me last year." "How so, baby?" "Because you gave it to me because you're proud of who I am, not because you felt like you had to, and I earned it through my grades and being responsible. It's not just a gift. It's proof that good things happen when you work hard and surround yourself with people who believe in you." I hugged my daughter tight, marveling at her wisdom. At 13, she understood something that had taken me years to learn, that love earned through authenticity feels completely different from attention gained through manipulation or pity. Our Christmas celebration was small but perfect. Emma, me, Jennifer, and Marcus, and Ms. Williams, who had become like family to us. We cooked together, played games, and shared stories. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no wondering when someone would say something cruel. "You know what's funny?" Jennifer said as we cleaned up after dinner. "This is the first Christmas in years where I actually enjoyed myself instead of just surviving it." "That's what happens when you stop accepting toxic behavior," I replied. "You create space for actual happiness." As the evening wound down and our guests headed home, Emma and I sat on the couch looking at our Christmas tree. The lights twinkled peacefully, and the house felt full of contentment. "Mom," Emma said softly, "do you ever miss her?" I considered the question carefully. I miss the idea of what she could have been, a loving grandmother who supported and encouraged you, but I don't miss the reality of who she chose to be, and I'll never regret protecting you from that. "I used to think family meant you had to accept whatever people did to you because you were related," Emma said. "But now I know that's not true. Real family means people who want the best for you, right?" "Exactly right, baby. Family is what you choose to build with people who choose to love you well." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed in her beautiful art studio bedroom, I reflected on everything we'd been through. 12 months ago, I'd been a woman trapped by obligation and fear, watching my daughter suffer because I was too afraid of conflict to protect her. Tonight, I was a mother who had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is draw a hard line and refuse to cross it. The iPhone 16 Pro Max sat charging on Emma's nightstand, but it was just a phone. The real gift was the lesson we'd both learned, that our worth isn't determined by other people's capacity to love us, and that we have the power to surround ourselves with people who see our value and celebrate it. Emma fell asleep with a smile on her face, and I knew we'd made the right choice. Sometimes you have to lose family to find it. Sometimes you have to say no more to make room for yes, finally. And sometimes standing up to one person's cruelty gives an entire family permission to choose love over obligation, authenticity over appearance, and peace over keeping the peace. As I turned off the lights and headed to my own room, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, not for the trials we'd faced, but for the strength we'd found to overcome them, and for the beautiful, peaceful life we'd built on the other side of setting boundaries. Mrs. Anderson had wanted to teach us about family hierarchy and conditional love. Instead, she'd taught us about unconditional self-worth and the courage to demand better. For that unexpected lesson, I was almost grateful.